That picture wasn't meant for anyone to see. Claire Bennett's voice came from the doorway like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. Ethan Miller stopped typing. The blue glow of the laptop washed over his tired face, catching the faint grease beneath his fingernails and the frayed edge of his work badge. On the screen, beneath layers of corrupted files and failing security protocols, was a photograph of Claire standing alone beside a rain-streaked window. No designer suit. No diamond earrings. No cold expression sharp enough to silence a boardroom. Just a young woman trying not to cry. Behind Ethan, polished shoes clicked across the marble floor. Close it. I was repairing the damaged drive. I said close it. I didn't open the photograph. The office went quiet. Outside the glass walls, 3 members of the executive technology team watched with folded arms. They had spent 6 hours failing to repair the CEO's computer. Ethan had been called only because the building manager remembered the quiet contract technician working 2 floors below. Richard Cole stood among them, smiling. A temporary repairman digging through the CEO's private files, he said. That's one way to end a career. A few people laughed. Ethan did not turn around. He had heard that kind of laughter before. At job interviews when they saw the gap in his resume. At school meetings when someone assumed a single father could not manage his daughter alone. In rooms where expensive suits mistook silence for weakness. He had learned not to fight every insult. Some battles took food from the table. Some pride came with a price Lily could not afford. Claire stepped closer. Her perfume carried a faint trace of cedar and winter roses, but beneath it was cold coffee, sleeplessness, and something more fragile than anger. Did you look at it? She asked. Ethan studied the screen. A warning icon blinked in the corner, appearing and disappearing like a heartbeat beneath the skin. No, but you saw it. Yes. Richard gave a soft, contemptuous laugh. Perhaps he would like to offer a professional opinion. Claire's eyes stayed on Ethan. Then, with the entire doorway watching, she asked the question no one expected from a woman whose name appeared on skyscrapers, patents, and magazine covers. Do you think I'm pretty? The laughter died. Ethan slowly lifted his eyes. For one moment, he did not see Bennett Technologies' celebrated CEO. He saw a woman standing behind walls built from money, discipline, and old humiliation. A woman asking about beauty when what she truly wanted to know was whether someone could see her without wanting something in return. You look sad, he said. Richard's smile vanished. Claire's face hardened. That wasn't my question. No, Ethan replied quietly. But it was the truth in the photograph. A breath moved through the room. Claire reached for the laptop, but Ethan's hand remained beside the keyboard. You may want to wait. Why? Because your computer wasn't broken. He turned the screen toward her. Behind the photograph, lines of encrypted code began moving by themselves. Someone inside this company is watching you. The office fell silent, and Ethan had not yet shown them what else he had found. Claire Bennett did not answer immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on the scrolling lines of encrypted code racing across the screen, while every executive in the hallway held the same uneasy silence. Richard Cole stepped forward first, folding his arms with the confidence of a man who believed authority could replace evidence. Enough of this, he said. Disconnect the computer. Security can handle whatever he thinks he found. Ethan slowly removed his hands from the keyboard. His expression never changed. If you disconnect it now, whoever is inside the system will know we found them. Richard gave a dismissive smile. You expect us to believe that a contract technician understands a threat our cybersecurity department somehow missed? Ethan nodded once. No, I expect you to look at the facts. Claire finally spoke. Everyone except Mr. Cole, stay outside. The hallway emptied without another word. The heavy glass door closed, sealing the room in quiet. The city lights shimmered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows while the hum of the servers blended with the distant sound of traffic nearly 40 stories below. Claire looked at Ethan with the same guarded expression she had worn for years in boardrooms, interviews, and negotiations. Who are you? She asked. Ethan looked back at the monitor instead of at her. Someone who fixes problems. That is not what I asked. He smiled faintly. It is the only answer that matters tonight. Claire studied him carefully. His clothes were simple. His work boots showed years of wear. The sleeves of his faded blue work shirt had been rolled neatly to his elbows. Nothing about him suggested brilliance. Yet nothing about him matched the calm confidence of an ordinary repair technician either. How did you notice the intrusion? She asked. Ethan enlarged a tiny system log hidden beneath dozens of ordinary background processes. Because whoever built this wanted everyone to notice the obvious damage. He highlighted another line. The real attack is here. Claire leaned closer. Our internal team never mentioned that, because they were looking where the attacker wanted them to look. She remained silent. Ethan continued in the same measured voice. Good hackers hide themselves. Great hackers make everyone chase the wrong problem. Claire slowly sat in the chair across from him. For the first time that day, she looked tired instead of powerful. Can you stop it? Ethan did not answer right away. He watched another stream of encrypted traffic appear before quietly closing one connection after another. The movement was smooth, almost effortless, like someone playing a familiar piano piece from memory. After several seconds, the blinking warning disappeared. The office became strangely still. Claire looked at the screen, then back at Ethan. It is gone. For tonight, he replied. Tomorrow they will try again. Claire folded her hands together. Why would anyone target this computer? Ethan looked toward the framed awards covering the wall before his eyes settled on the family photograph sitting quietly beside her monitor. There was no husband, no parents, no smiling relatives. Only Claire standing beside hundreds of employees during the company's 10th anniversary celebration. Because they are not trying to steal your computer, he said softly. They are trying to steal your future. Those words lingered between them. Claire lowered her eyes for only a moment before lifting them again. Come back tomorrow morning, she said. I want you working directly with me until this is over. Ethan hesitated. I start my second job at 6 in the morning. Second job. I clean offices across town before taking my daughter to school. Claire blinked with quiet surprise. She had spent years surrounded by people eager to impress her, yet the one man who had just protected her company cared more about getting his little girl to school on time than standing inside the office of a billionaire chief executive officer. Something deep inside her shifted, almost too quietly to notice. The next morning arrived with a pale orange sunrise spreading across downtown Chicago, but Ethan Miller had already been awake for nearly 4 hours. At 4:30 in the morning, he unlocked the side entrance of an office building on the west side, pushed a quiet janitor cart across polished tile floors, and worked with the same patience he had shown inside the chief executive officer's office the night before. Every desk was left exactly as he found it. Every coffee mug was placed back where it belonged. Every computer screen remained dark because Ethan believed trust was measured by what a person refused to touch. By 6:15, he was driving his 12-year-old pickup truck toward Lincoln Elementary School. Lily sat beside him eating a homemade blueberry muffin while finishing her spelling homework. Did you fix the important computer, Dad? She asked with a hopeful smile. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. It is working for now. Lily nodded. People probably thanked you. Ethan smiled quietly. Not everyone says thank you the same way. Lily thought about that for a moment before reaching into her backpack and handing him a folded drawing. It showed a father repairing a broken bridge while strangers crossed safely without noticing him. Across the top she had written in careful handwriting, "The strongest people fix things they did not break." Ethan looked at the picture only long enough to keep his emotions from showing. I love it, he said softly. Can I put it in my toolbox? Lily grinned. That is exactly where it belongs. After dropping her at school, Ethan drove across the city toward Bennett Technologies. The glass tower reflected the morning sky like polished silver, but inside the atmosphere felt colder than the autumn air outside. Employees gathered in small groups whispering about the unexplained system failure from the previous evening. Richard Cole stood near the executive conference room, speaking confidently with the cybersecurity department. The moment he noticed Ethan stepping out of the elevator, his expression hardened. I am surprised they actually invited you back, Richard said loudly enough for nearby employees to hear. Ethan simply nodded. Good morning. Richard chuckled. Do not mistake curiosity for respect. Ethan answered without slowing his pace. I never do. The conference room doors opened before another word could be exchanged. Claire Bennett entered carrying only a notebook instead of her usual stack of reports. Her eyes moved across the room before stopping on Ethan. Mr. Miller, she said calmly, please sit beside me. The room became noticeably quieter. Several executives exchanged confused looks. Contract technicians never sat beside the chief executive officer during executive meetings. Richard forced a polite smile, but disappointment flickered across his face before disappearing behind practiced professionalism. Claire waited until everyone had taken their seats before speaking. Last night, someone attempted to gain unauthorized access to confidential company information. Mr. Miller prevented that attempt. A murmur spread around the room. Richard leaned forward. With respect, Claire, we still do not know exactly what happened. Claire turned toward Ethan. Then perhaps we should let the only person who saw everything explain it. Ethan remained seated for several seconds before standing slowly. He looked around the conference table, not with pride, not with fear, but with the quiet composure of a man who had spent years allowing his work to speak before his voice ever needed to. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the morning sun continued climbing above the skyline, while inside Bennett Technologies, something far more important had just begun to rise. Respect. Every conversation inside the executive conference room came to a stop as Ethan connected Claire Bennett's laptop to the large display at the front of the room. The screen remained black for a brief moment before rows of timestamps and system activity quietly appeared. There were no dramatic graphics, no flashing warnings, only ordinary records that most people would have ignored. Ethan rested one hand lightly on the conference table. The person responsible did not break into the system by force, he said calmly. They walked through a door that was already unlocked. Several executives exchanged puzzled looks. Richard Cole leaned back in his chair with an amused smile. That sounds poetic, he said. Unfortunately, technology is based on evidence. Ethan nodded. I agree. With a few simple commands, he enlarged one section of the activity log. Every login leaves a footprint. Most people only look for the footprint itself. I look for where the footprints suddenly disappear. The room grew quieter. Claire watched the screen without interrupting. Ethan continued. At 9:14 yesterday morning, someone copied encrypted development files from the artificial intelligence research server. The transfer lasted exactly 4 minutes and 18 seconds. Then the system generated hundreds of meaningless error messages. Richard folded his hands. Which explains why our team focused on repairing the server instead of asking why it failed. Ethan looked at him briefly. Exactly. Claire slowly stood and walked closer to the display. You were saying the system damage was only a distraction. Yes. Ethan highlighted another line hidden beneath dozens of routine maintenance records. The real objective was never to destroy information. It was to quietly remove it while everyone was looking somewhere else. The room fell into thoughtful silence. One of the senior engineers finally spoke. We reviewed those logs last night. None of this was visible. Ethan gave a small, respectful smile. Because someone cleaned the evidence. The engineer frowned. Then how did you recover it? Ethan reached into his worn leather tool bag and removed a small external drive. Most people trust what a computer remembers. I trust what it forgets. Claire looked at the tiny device with growing curiosity. You made a recovery image before repairing my computer. Ethan nodded once. I always create one before touching damaged systems. If I make a mistake, I need a way back. Claire remained silent for several seconds. That answer sounded less like technical procedure and more like a philosophy for life. Richard suddenly cleared his throat. Even if everything you are saying is true, none of this identifies who did it. Ethan agreed immediately. Not yet. Richard smiled again, clearly relieved. Then we are discussing theories, not facts. Ethan pressed one final key. A hidden timeline slowly appeared across the display, connecting dozens of small system events into one continuous pattern stretching back almost 6 months. Quiet whispers spread around the table. Ethan spoke in the same measured voice. Whoever planned this was patient. They never stole enough information to attract attention. They took one small piece at a time. Claire felt a chill she could not explain. She recognized several dates immediately. Every transfer had occurred the evening before a major product announcement. Ethan looked toward the window where sunlight reflected against neighboring skyscrapers before finishing his thought. This was never one attack. This has been happening for half a year. No one laughed anymore. Even Richard's confident expression faded as every eye in the room slowly turned away from Ethan and toward the timeline that quietly exposed a secret none of them had realized was unfolding inside their own company. The conference room remained silent long after the screen stopped changing. Claire Bennett slowly returned to her seat without taking her eyes off the timeline that stretched across the display. 6 months of carefully hidden activity now rested in front of every executive. Nobody reached for a phone. Nobody whispered. The quiet itself had become evidence. Richard Cole broke the silence with a calm voice that sounded almost rehearsed. "There is still one problem," he said. "Everything we have seen came from a computer that Mr. Miller controlled overnight. We have no independent verification that these records were not altered." Several heads turned toward Ethan. The accusation was gentle, almost polite, yet it carried enough doubt to shift the mood inside the room. Claire looked at Ethan without speaking. She wanted to believe him, but she had spent years leading a company where trust could never replace proof. Ethan did not defend himself. He simply reached into his tool bag once more and placed a sealed evidence drive on the conference table. "I expected someone to ask that," he said quietly. "This copy was created before I repaired the system. The digital signature has not changed." The senior cybersecurity engineer accepted the drive and connected it to an isolated workstation. Nobody spoke while the verification software completed its examination. 1 minute felt much longer inside that room. Finally, the engineer looked up. "The signature is authentic. The files have not been modified." Richard forced a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Even so, we still do not know who is responsible." Ethan nodded. "That is true." Claire leaned forward. "Can you find them?" Ethan answered with complete honesty. "Yes, but only if they believe nobody noticed them." Richard frowned. "Meaning?" Ethan pointed to the screen again. "If we announce an investigation today, they will disappear. If we continue acting as though nothing happened, they will make another move." Claire folded her hands together. She understood the risk immediately. "You want us to leave the door open?" "I want them to think it is still open." The room became quiet once again. One executive shook his head. "That sounds dangerous." Ethan looked at him respectfully. "Sometimes protecting something requires patience instead of noise." Claire recognized those words. They sounded remarkably similar to the answer he had given about the photograph the night before. Truth first, emotion second. She slowly stood and made her decision. "Only the people inside this room know what we have discovered. This discussion does not leave this floor." Every executive agreed. Richard hesitated for only a fraction of a second before nodding as well. Ethan noticed it. He noticed many things without reacting to them. As the meeting came to an end, Claire walked beside Ethan toward the elevator instead of returning to her office. "There is something I do not understand," she said softly. "Someone with your knowledge could earn several times what we pay our senior engineers. Why are you repairing computers as a contractor?" Ethan pressed the elevator button and watched the doors open. "Because some jobs give you a career." He paused before looking at her with quiet sincerity. "And some responsibilities give you a reason to wake up every morning." Claire immediately thought of the little girl he had mentioned. She remembered the warmth in his voice when he spoke about taking his daughter to school. At that moment, she realized something that every resume would have failed to reveal. The greatest qualification Ethan Miller carried into her company was not hidden inside his technical skills. It was the character built through years of choosing responsibility over recognition. Neither of them noticed Richard standing at the far end of the hallway, watching the elevator doors close with an expression that was calm on the outside but deeply unsettled within. For the next 3 days, Bennett Technologies continued operating as though nothing had changed, exactly as Ethan Miller had recommended. Meetings followed their normal schedules. Product demonstrations continued. Employees laughed in the cafeteria. Visitors entered and left the building without noticing the quiet investigation unfolding beneath the surface. Only a handful of people knew that every network request, every remote login, and every unusual file transfer was now being recorded with far greater precision than before. Ethan arrived before sunrise each morning after finishing his cleaning job across town. He carried the same worn leather tool bag, drank the same plain black coffee, and never asked for recognition. Most employees still assumed he was nothing more than temporary technical support. That misunderstanding suited him perfectly. The less attention he attracted, the easier it became to watch the system instead of the people watching him. Claire Bennett noticed something else. Ethan never criticized anyone in public. Even when junior engineers made mistakes, he quietly explained the solution instead of pointing out the error. One afternoon, she stood outside the security operations room without interrupting. A young analyst apologized after overlooking an important log entry. Ethan simply smiled. "You were looking for what was loud," he said gently. "Experience teaches you to notice what stays quiet." The analyst nodded with visible relief. Claire remained in the hallway longer than she intended. She had built an entire career rewarding confidence and speed, yet the man everyone underestimated seemed to lead through patience instead of pressure. Later that evening, she asked her executive assistant to gather Ethan's employment history. The report arrived within the hour, but instead of answering her questions, it created many more. His recent records showed only contract work, maintenance jobs, and temporary technical support. Then there was a gap of several years. Before that gap, however, one line immediately captured her attention. Ethan Miller, Senior Security Systems Architect, Hawthorne Cyber Defense. Claire recognized the company at once. Years earlier, its encryption framework had become an industry standard used by major financial institutions and government contractors across the country. She searched for the original technical paper and found a familiar name listed among the principal architects. Ethan Miller. She read it twice to make certain she was not imagining it. The man repairing office computers and driving an aging pickup truck had once helped design technology respected throughout the industry. She quietly closed the document and leaned back in her chair. Success had not disappeared from his life. He had simply walked away from it. The following morning, Claire found Ethan sitting alone in the employee cafeteria eating oatmeal from a simple container while reviewing overnight security logs. She placed the printed resume beside him without saying a word. Ethan glanced at the first page, then calmly folded it closed. "You found my past," he said. Claire sat across from him. "You never mentioned it." Ethan stirred his coffee slowly. "Nobody asked. You could have been leading an entire cybersecurity division." He smiled with the same quiet kindness she had begun to recognize. "Life asked me to lead someone more important." Claire immediately thought of Lily. Before she could speak again, Ethan's secure monitoring tablet vibrated once on the table. He looked down at the alert, and for the first time since entering Bennett Technologies, the calm expression on his face changed. It was only for a second, but Claire saw it clearly. Someone had finally made the mistake he had been patiently waiting for. Ethan looked at the notification for less than 3 seconds before locking the screen again. Claire noticed the change immediately. "What happened?" she asked quietly. Ethan slipped the tablet into his worn leather bag and stood from the cafeteria table. "Our visitor came back." Claire followed him without another question. They walked through the executive hallway in silence while employees greeted them with ordinary smiles, completely unaware that every passing minute carried another piece of the hidden investigation forward. Inside the temporary security room, Ethan connected the monitoring tablet to a larger display. A single connection had appeared exactly where he hoped it would. The transfer was small, almost invisible, but it matched the same pattern that had repeated for months. Claire studied the screen. "Can you trace it?" Ethan nodded. "Not yet." She looked at him with surprise. "Why wait?" Ethan answered in the same calm voice she had come to trust. "Because whoever started this believes they are still invisible. If I interrupt now, we catch one transfer. If I wait, we learn who has been opening the door every time." Claire remained silent. Patience had never been easy for her, but she understood his reasoning. Before another word could be spoken, Richard Cole entered the room carrying a folder beneath his arm. He smiled politely, but his eyes moved immediately toward the display. "Working hard already?" he asked. Ethan quietly minimized the monitoring window. "Always." Richard placed the folder on Claire's desk. "Human Resources completed the background review you requested." Claire frowned slightly. "I did not request one." Richard looked almost surprised. "Really? I assumed legal would want complete documentation on anyone handling confidential company systems." Claire opened the folder. Inside were copies of Ethan's contract history, temporary employment records, and several years that appeared almost empty. Richard spoke before she could finish reading. "There are significant gaps in his employment. No executive references. No recent security clearance. From a corporate perspective, that should concern all of us." Ethan stood quietly without interrupting. He had learned years ago that people determined to doubt someone rarely changed their minds during the first conversation. Richard continued, "If confidential information has been disappearing for months, should we not also investigate the man who suddenly appeared just before we discovered it?" The room grew still. Several department managers standing near the doorway exchanged uncertain glances. The suggestion was subtle, but powerful enough to plant doubt. Claire slowly closed the folder. She looked at Ethan. "Would you like to respond?" Ethan answered with complete honesty. "You should investigate everyone, including me." Richard smiled faintly, believing the conversation had turned in his favor. Ethan continued before anyone else could speak. Trust is never built by avoiding questions. It is built by surviving them. Claire held his gaze for a long moment. There was no fear in his eyes. No anger. Only quiet dignity. Even so, she also understood her responsibility as Chief Executive Officer. Until we finish verifying every detail, she said carefully, I need you to step away from direct access to our internal systems. The words seemed to echo through the room. Richard lowered his eyes, hiding the satisfaction behind a professional expression. Ethan simply removed his temporary security badge and placed it gently on Claire's desk. I understand, he said. He picked up his worn leather bag and walked toward the elevator without asking for sympathy or defending his reputation. Claire watched the doors close and felt an unexpected weight settle in her heart. Something about dismissing the quietest man in the building felt deeply wrong. Across town, as the afternoon school bell rang, Lily waited outside with the drawing that still read, "The strongest people fix things they did not break," unaware that her father had just become the easiest person for someone else to blame. The next afternoon, the executive board gathered for what was expected to be an ordinary quarterly strategy meeting. Claire Bennett sat at the head of the long conference table, but her attention drifted repeatedly toward the empty chair where Ethan had quietly worked only a day earlier. The room felt complete on paper, yet strangely incomplete in spirit. Richard Cole began presenting financial projections with his usual confidence, while polished slides filled the large display. Everything appeared normal until one of the senior engineers interrupted him. We have another problem. Every face turned toward the second monitor as warning notifications began appearing across the internal network. Confidential development files were moving again. This time the transfer was larger, faster, and happening during business hours. Richard immediately stood. Disconnect every external connection, he ordered. The security team rushed to follow his instructions, but the alerts continued multiplying across the screen. Claire felt the same uneasy realization she had experienced days earlier. They were repeating exactly what Ethan had warned them not to do. Stop, she said firmly. The room froze. Call Mr. Miller. Several executives exchanged surprised looks, but nobody questioned her decision. 10 minutes later, the conference room doors opened quietly. Ethan entered wearing the same faded blue work shirt he had worn every day before. His leather tool bag rested over one shoulder, and his expression remained calm despite the circumstances. Nobody greeted him with laughter this time. Claire walked toward him before anyone else could speak. I made a mistake, she said honestly. Will you help us? Ethan gave a small respectful nod. Of course. He placed his bag on the conference table, connected his recovery drive to the system, and looked at the live network activity without saying a word. Nearly a full minute passed in complete silence. No dramatic movements. No hurried typing. Only careful observation. Finally, he pointed to one tiny connection hidden beneath hundreds of ordinary transactions. There, the senior cybersecurity engineer frowned. That is only an internal authorization request. Ethan looked at him with quiet patience. Exactly. The thief is no longer entering from outside. They are already inside. Richard crossed his arms. Can you prove that? Ethan enlarged the authorization history until dozens of nearly identical requests appeared across the display. Every transfer requires executive approval credentials. Claire's eyes narrowed. Only a few people have that level of access. Ethan nodded, which means the attacker has been borrowing trust instead of breaking security. He opened another log that nobody else had noticed. The timestamps aligned perfectly with every confidential file transfer over the previous 6 months. Then he overlaid employee building access records on top of the network activity. One by one, the matching entries disappeared until only a single pattern remained. Nobody spoke. Ethan slowly stepped away from the keyboard. Computers almost never betray people, he said softly. People betray themselves through repetition. The final report finished processing. A single executive identification number remained highlighted in bright blue at the center of the screen. Every pair of eyes followed it as the system expanded the record automatically. The name that appeared beneath the authorization code caused the entire boardroom to fall into absolute silence. Richard Cole. No one spoke after Richard Cole's name appeared on the screen. The silence was so complete that the quiet hum of the conference room projector suddenly seemed louder than every voice in the building. Richard stared at the display, then forced a slow smile. "This proves nothing," he said. "Someone could have used my credentials." Ethan Miller did not argue. He never had. Instead, he calmly opened one final log that he had intentionally left untouched until that moment. "Credentials can be stolen," he said softly. "Habits cannot." He enlarged a series of authentication records. Every unauthorized transfer had occurred within 7 minutes after Richard used his executive key card to enter the restricted research floor. Every transfer ended moments before his badge left the building. Then Ethan overlaid another record, one created by the building automation system rather than the computer network. The conference room lights dimmed automatically as the timeline synchronized. "The climate control sensors record occupancy to manage energy usage," Ethan explained. "They are independent from the network. They cannot be edited from the same system." Every highlighted entry matched Richard's movements perfectly. The senior cybersecurity engineer slowly removed his glasses and examined the records twice before speaking. "The timestamps are consistent across every independent system." Another executive quietly added, "There is no reasonable explanation for this pattern." Richard looked around the room, searching for support, but every familiar face had become painfully still. Claire Bennett stood without raising her voice. "Richard, effective immediately. Your access is suspended pending the completion of the investigation." Richard opened his mouth as though to protest, but the words never came. The confidence that had carried him through every meeting simply disappeared. He quietly placed his company identification badge on the table. No applause followed. No celebration filled the room. Justice arrived without noise. Richard slowly walked toward the door, paused for a brief moment, then left the conference room without looking back. The door closed gently behind him. Ethan disconnected his recovery drive and began placing his cables back into the worn leather bag, as though the most important part of his day had already ended. Claire watched him for several seconds before speaking. "You saved this company." Ethan shook his head. "I only protected what people worked hard to build. You also protected me." Ethan smiled with quiet humility. Leaders carry enough weight already. The board members remained seated, each silently reflecting on how easily they had questioned the one person who had never asked for recognition. Later that evening, Claire drove across the city instead of returning to her penthouse. She followed the address listed in Ethan's employment file until she reached a modest brick house on a quiet street. Through the front window, she saw Ethan helping Lily with her science project at the kitchen table. They laughed together over a model bridge built from wooden craft sticks. There were no expensive decorations, no luxury furniture, only warmth, patience, and a home filled with peace. Claire knocked softly. Lily answered first with a welcoming smile. Ethan looked surprised to see Claire standing on the porch. For a moment, neither adult spoke. Then Claire quietly asked the same question that had changed everything only days before. "Do you think I am pretty?" Ethan looked at her with the same calm honesty she had never forgotten. "Yes," he answered, "but not because of a photograph, a title, or success. You are beautiful every time you choose truth over pride, kindness over fear, and people over power." Claire lowered her eyes as tears quietly gathered, not from sadness, but from relief. For years she had searched for approval in mirrors, achievements, and headlines. A humble single father had reminded her that real beauty was measured by character. Lily gently slipped her small hand into Claire's and smiled. The evening sun settled across the neighborhood, while 3 quiet hearts stood together on the front porch. And in that peaceful silence, everyone finally found what they had been looking for all along: respect, second chances, and a place to belong.